Welcome to the Centre of the F1 World, or how to find the centre of your own. In this video we'll talk about what a weighted centroid is. We use a weighted centroid to work out exactly where the centre of your world or your target's world is, and we'll talk about using earthtunneling.com to find the weighted centroid or the centre of your target's world. I thought it would be interesting to use F1 circuits for this because they're not exactly distributed evenly around the world, and I thought it might be quite interesting to discover where the centre of the F1 world is. So, what is a weighted centroid? A weighted centroid is the true centre of a set of locations, but instead of treating all points equally, it shifts based on their distribution. For something like F1 circuits, a simple average of GPS coordinates wouldn't make sense because locations aren't evenly spread. Instead, we calculate an initial mean centroid, then measure how far each circuit is from that point. Those distances become weights. Clusters of circuits pull the centre towards them, while isolated locations have less influence. This gives us a realistic centre of the world for F1 races, reflecting where most races actually happen. And the app does all of this automatically. So let's look at our system targets. We have weighted centroid. This is essentially the centre of our world. It happens to be the centre of the Earth at the moment because we have no targets. And next we have the weighted centroid surface position. Now this is a surface representation of where the weighted centroid is. Showing a position underground where many weighted centroids would be is not of much use to people. With this we can see where on the surface of the world the weighted centroid would be. Now before we start with this, I'm going to hide some of the other targets we have on here. So I'll select the current position, the tracker, and the ISS, the International Space Station, and I'll toggle those targets off. And now let's open the transparency slider so that we can see what the targets look like without the Earth's surface. Here we can see the weighted centroid in red in the centre of the Earth and the weighted centroid surface position in yellow at the North Pole. If we look at the weighted centroid's coordinates, we can see that the geodetic coordinates for longitude, latitude and altitude are 0, 90 and minus 6,356,752.314 metres for the altitude. That would be minus around about 6,300 kilometres, which is about the centre of the Earth. In geocentric coordinates, which is metres from the centre of the Earth on an X, Y and Z axis, these are 0, 0 and 0. The same with the Earth tunneling coordinates. If we look at the weighted centroid surface position coordinates, we can see that they are very similar, except for the altitude is very different. In this case, the longitude and latitude are 0 and 90, but the altitude is minus 1 metre. This is because it is very difficult to make calculations for the surface position 100% accurate because it is based on an ellipsoid. While the Earth is very well modelled by certain ellipsoids, it's not absolutely perfectly modelled. Therefore, some calculations are a few metres out. If we look at the geocentric position here, we have X as 0, Y as 0 and Z as 6,356,752.3 metres. That is 6,356,752 metres along the Z-axis away from the centre of the Earth. So the next step is to add our targets. As I said, this is about F1 circuits around the world, and I'm going to use some targets that I have stored on the earthtunneling.com website. So now, let's load some targets. If we click on the button in the top left corner of the screen, select the Load Targets Game button, click on the earthtunneling.com button, and we get a choice of 3 sets of targets. We have general places, F1 circuits, and tennis tournaments. We're going to select F1 circuits. Now, to view these targets in our targets list, we're going to click on the Target Filters button. We're going to scroll down in the Selected Groups list, and we're going to select the group F1 2024 circuits. To view the targets list again, we click the Target Filters button. Let's have a look through the list. As an example, we have the Mexico City Grand Prix. If we tick this button here, we can see that the map goes straight to that position. Check on the right of the screen. We also have the United States Grand Prix. We can switch to the location like this. And we have the Singapore Grand Prix. Again, clicking here to show the position on the map. Now let's take a look to see how all of these new targets have affected the weighted centroid on the transparent map. First of all, I'll select the weighted centroid so that I'm focused on it. Then I'll change the slider to show the wire mesh. I neglected to think about this. Because the camera is always above the Earth, we will be viewing the weighted centroid underneath the weighted centroid's surface position, shown in yellow. So if I move the Earth just slightly with my finger, we can see the weighted centroid in red underneath the weighted centroid surface position in yellow. As you can see, the surface position of the centre of the F1 world is a place called Stepanów, sorry about my pronunciation, which is a village in Poland. But if we go back to the wireframe globe and use the transparency slider to show the map again, we can zoom in to show exactly where this is. As we zoom in, you'll notice that the yellow dot disappears. That is because as we get closer to the surface of the Earth, it appears to cover the location. All we need to do to view this again is to touch the transparency slider to make the surface of the Earth slightly transparent. There we go. So, that spot there is the centre of the world on the surface of the Earth for F1 tracks. So let's look at the coordinates for the F1 centre of the world. We have a longitude of 16.6167, a latitude of 51.2468, and an altitude of minus 1.681816 million metres. Basically, that's 1,681 kilometres below the surface of Stepanów, the village in Poland we were just talking about. Again, apologies for the pronunciation. And here are the coordinates for Stepanów. While I've demonstrated this with F1 circuits, there are many other uses for this. You could have the centre of your holiday world, add all of the places you've travelled to and discover the true centre of your holiday world. The centre of your friend's world, input your friends' addresses from across the globe and find the ideal meeting spot. The centre of your team's world, whether it's an international business team or sports team, find the best geographical midpoint for meetups. If you have an Airbnb property, maybe you could use this to tell your guests where the centre of your guest's world is. Airbnb users, you could do the same but in reverse. I'd be interested to hear how people decide to use this. I'd also be interested in hearing about any additional features you might like to see. Please feel free to get in contact.